I have been asked to talk today about energy medicine, and that is what we are going to do. Energy medicine is a complicated subject, especially in relation to Chinese medicine, and it is one of the topics that I start usually when people start learning with me, explaining why it doesn't fit into Chinese medicine and in Qigong and in Tai Chi Chuan, although everybody nowadays talks about it. I will explain in this video to you what the ideas of Chinese medicine is in relationship to energy medicine, what energy medicine thinks that Chinese medicine is, and I will tell you a little bit about the history of energy medicine. And this is especially interesting because you might hear some unexpected things, and also why when you use energy medicine to practice Qigong, which is okay, you actually should not call it Qigong because that only confuses the matter. You should just call it an extension of Western esoterics with any name that you think that is more suitable or not. Qigong is not about energy, Chinese medicine is not about energy, but what then is energy medicine? So let's go discuss this and let's clarify this for once and for all so that everybody can understand that and that you can choose sides in this process. Because the choosing side actually is very important because you're going to make a different kind of progression in energy medicine and in the original language of Chinese medicine. And I will try to explain to you why that is, and I will also try to illustrate it with some examples, and I will try to show you some exercises when they are done from the perspective of energy medicine and if they are done from the perspective of Chinese medicine. You will be shocked. Okay. Let's first assume that Chinese medicine is older than Western medicine. Western medicine has a history, goes back to particular kind of ideas and concepts that do have an origin all the way to the Greek times and maybe older, even to the Assyrian times. But Chinese medicine goes back all the way to the Neolithic times and has been formalized about 2600 years ago, and has since that time every dynasty contributed some aspects to Chinese medicine and has been doing pretty good without any Western scientific influence. And this is, you have to keep in mind by understanding that Chinese medicine never needed Western medicine to explain itself. It was doing pretty good with some handicaps, but be honest, Western medicine also has its handicaps, and the two overlap each other, and as a result of that, next to each other they could do pretty good, but they should not do something with each other's language. And today's video is going to explain you a little bit more about why that is very important and why it is very important to make that clear separation and respect Chinese medicine, Qigong, Tai Chi Chuan and so on by using it only on its own merits and its own language. That means also for things like modern acupuncture from China, TCM, a lot of things are based on Western medicine. Give you an example. I was at a meeting in the Chaoyang Hospital with 11 of the top brass of the Chinese medicine government, which are called generals or captains or all kind of titles that they have. And these are people that from the beginning of the communist era, they were in charge of the development of Chinese medicine. They have done long studies. They are definitely very qualified for that position. Everybody agrees about that. So these are the most senior in their profession. At a certain point, the United Nations, UNESCO, I think, recognized acupuncture as World Heritage. And the discussion was at that moment, like, how do we deal with that? Because what is acupuncture? We don't use the old style needles. We don't use the old style theory. We do not use the same tools at that time, and our educational theory actually has been transformed so much that it is actually not very close to anything that resembles the past. What do we do? Do we need to renovate acupuncture towards its past? Or do we leave it as it is? As far as I know, they haven't found a solution, but there is a strong revivalist movement in China to try to get Chinese medicine back on its original pathway. And in fact, as a non-Chinese, I am sort of a revivalist, you can say, because I think doing things in the original way is better for the development of Chinese medicine than the modern way. Then from the traditional way, the old way, you can still look at the present and say like, oh, but that actually is very helpful. This understanding is very helpful. But you can clarify this in your own conceptual realm. For Qigong, it's the same. Qigong in itself is, of course, a new development. Qigong, as it is practiced nowadays, is not ancient at all. It goes back on ancient traditions originating probably in Neolithic shamanism. Rituals, prayer, exorcism, soul retrieval, and so forth and so forth. What we call soul retrieval was actually getting part of the Hun and the Po to cooperate with the person again, so that they would be able to restore themselves and come back to life. But at the moment when you look at it from these perspectives, you see there is a whole range of problems being created by moving away from there. The old traditions, they have a knowledge base, they have a skill base, they have a theoretical base. And sure, there are a lot of new things that Chinese medicine doesn't have a direct answer to if you take it from a revivalist standpoint. But because of actually doing things from the old style way, you become like that. I have another story for you, because this is really sign of the times. I was with my Shifu Yao. I was having a dinner with the commissar of Wuhan. There was the director of a Chinese medicine hospital, and there were a few other people there, but these three people are the most important ones. My sister was there, Tian Li Fang, and some other people, mostly business people. We were having lunch in a restaurant which prided itself on the jokes that it made about Mao Zedong and Stalin and other ones in their advertisements. So it was a very popular restaurant. It was big and it was nice food. We were eating on a table on a lake, and they would catch the fish in the lake and then bring it on our table. I'm vegetarian, but for the occasion. The Chinese medicine doctor, the director of the hospital, he was like, oh, do you know anything about Chinese medicine? Because he heard that I practice Chinese medicine. And he said, like, where is Zhusan Li? Where is He Guo? And he talked about these kind of things because that is basically the way how they expect Westerners to understand Chinese medicine. Then my Shifu said, like, can you explain to this doctor how Chinese medicine functions according to what you think? So I explained what I learned and how Chinese medicine works, and what I also use in my school and the classes that I give. And the Chinese medicine professor was like, this is all nonsense. This is all not true. This is all just superstitious thing you just make up yourself. And then the director from the police chief, he said like, no, actually what he is saying is exactly what my grandfather said. And my grandfather was a Chinese medicine doctor. My families, they were originally Chinese medicine doctors. And you know that in the Communist Revolution, all kind of functions and jobs were mixed, and the tradition of transferring knowledge from one generation to the other generation was moved from one person to one person to one person to schools, like we do in the West. And as a result of that, he said, my grandfather used to tell me about that because he wanted me to follow up on this, but it was in secret at that moment because the political changes. But the things that he said were exactly like how he says it. So this is the pre-communist era, pre-nationalist era, and maybe even pre-Qin era forms of Chinese medicine. Because in the Qin dynasty, as you know, the Cultural Revolution was already full on its way. The Qing dynasty didn't really like Chinese culture as it was, and it was trying to make sure that everybody would become part of the Manchu culture. It's the same what would happen if we would become Russians. Because the Russians conquer us, they would expect us to become Russian. And if the Americans conquer us, which is more likely, then at that moment we are expected to become Americans. And we have moved in the last few years a lot towards America, but we are still Europeans. We still have our own power. And Chinese medicine also has been adjusted a lot, but there is still a lot also which is rooting in its own power. So this is as far as we go at this moment with Chinese medicine history. We now go a little bit further and we go talk about the history of energy medicine as a whole, and then we will go through a few names probably, And we will also start talking about some applications and differences and why that is important. I think you should know that in the past I also did a minor in history of Western esoterics. I did that as part of my PhD study. I went to China for my master and for my PhD dissertation, and to study there how Chinese medicine, Qigong, meditation and so on was actually practiced in China as different from the West. And during that period and before that period, I went to the Amsterdam University to study with Professor Wouter Hanegraaf, for the simple reason that I wanted to know more about it. I was invited to do this with a friend of mine who unfortunately died a few years later. And Patrick, my friend Patrick, he thought it would be helpful for understanding Western esoteric traditions, where we are both part of doing energy medicine, to go do that together. And it was actually a lot of fun. I did sort of complete the minor. I didn't do the last set just because of logistics and disagreement with also some of the conclusions of my professor at that time. And in that minor, we went through the last 500 years of history, basically since the gradual breakdown of Catholicism and the formation of other Christian branches, the Theosophic Society, witchcraft development, the disappearance of the original traditions from Europe before that time, and how that actually worked towards the present, and how there was this revivalist movement with people like Jung, Crowley, MacGregor Mathers, and so on, and a lot of other people. We talked about Christian Science, we talked about all kinds of other things. And one of the main things that became central in there is the impact of the works of Immanuel Kant, because Immanuel Kant changed our way of logic and our way of thinking, and it changed our language, not just English or German, but all the European languages. So as a result of that, we moved in another direction with our culture. The disappearance from the original culture is something that also probably happened after the Roman Empire fell, although we might considering the modern time, that we are still in the Roman Empire. But the reality that became visible is that Europe has, because of its splintering in different kind of nations, always been a culture based on cultural drift and language drift. That means that meanings, they continuously change and shift and stuff like this. And the summit of understanding what that actually can do is George Orwell. But it is also the theories of Machiavelli. Machiavelli and Orwell probably are the most important thinkers in the West, together with Immanuel Kant. Machiavelli came with the idea that you can come to power by controlling your opposition. And this is what you clearly see happening all the time. And this is why you can't really trust social media, because they are the state-controlled opposition. You can find any voice there, and you can create your own bubble all by yourself. Private realities, so to say. And at the moment, when you look at Orwell, where he's talked about newspeak, that is because of language change, you can make people believe and think in particular kind of ways, and there's not very much space for doubt. And then there's also the fear for prosecution that can play a role in there. The other aspects of our culture, they are just illustrations of these three thinkers, as far as I'm concerned. When you look at that history as a whole, you see that that is an important part. In Chinese culture, Confucius, which nowadays is praised somewhat in the modern Chinese state, Confucius said, you should leave a word always in its own meaning. At the moment when you shift the meaning of a word, that is never a total shift of meaning. That means that gradually you move away from its original meaning and you get a lot of side meanings, and as a result of that you create confusion, and confusion is the foundation of disease. So at the moment when you look at it from that perspective, you can see that the idea of cultural drift and language drift is not a good thing. In every dynasty, the Chinese culture went into a slightly different way. They adapted on each other and so on. So there was a sort of framework of continuity which was maintained sort of by the bureaucratic power of the Confucians. The state exams guaranteed basically a continuous transmission of knowledge so that the deviations were rooted around the same stem. Chinese medicine is part of that, right? So Chinese medicine, Taoism, they see themselves as the root of Chinese culture because they maintain the old culture. I wish though it was true. It is not true. I have seen many of my brothers and sisters, not only from our own Swenwu Pai, but also from other Pai, seen doing things which are clearly based on Western esoteric histories. And this is especially where they move towards the interpretation of Qi as energy, Jing as essence, and Shen as spirit, which are Christian concepts. But we'll get back to that in a moment. By the way, I don't want to delegitimize the idea of energy medicine. This is not my plan. I'm not saying that it is worthless, you should abandon it or anything like that. I just want to show you the history. If it works for you, it works. I'm still doing aspects of energy medicine in my own practice too, because people come for healings, because I have always been a healer before I became a Chinese medicine practitioner. In massage or in healing or other kind of things, it is also tempting to use energy healing. And the model of energy healing is in itself not a bad idea, I think, but you have to be aware of its roots to understand what you want it to be, because it can go two ways. To get a good understanding of energy healing, we have to go look at Anton Mesmer. Anton Mesmer lived from 1734 to 1815. It's a long time ago by now, but it is historically, it's a very short period. He was part of the discovery of galvanism. Galvanism was the idea that every living body has a form of biomagnetism, a sort of radiant field through which it could influence its environment. And he experimented with that and he do healings with that. And one of the most famous things that he tried was developing trance healing on the basis of Catholic exorcism, after he got an assignment from the church to try to put exorcism into a scientific framework. What he noticed is that when people try to influence other people's magnetic field, then you get tremblings, you get heat, you get seizures, and you also get trance states. People get into trance states, and these trance states were then seen as healing moments. You can still see it. If you look at bioenergetics, you can see that bioenergetics is straightly rooting into that aspect. In yoga and in Tai Chi Chuan and in Qigong and Daoyin and Daoist practices, but also in shamanic practices, you see all kind of people all over the world have used this aspect of trance healing within their framework. So it is in itself is nothing new or nothing alien. They don't call it like that. They call it possession. In Africa, you see that in all that kind of tribal gatherings and also in Native Americans, you see that people come together in healing sessions and they get possessed by a trance, and then a divine being or a spirit from the earth or the heaven or the water or a tree or anything like this, a kami, takes you over and then tries to affect a change. I practice that myself and I teach that when I give groups, but for individual people to learn by themselves, it's pretty risky, because at the moment when you get into this trance and you don't know how to get out, you get stuck into that trance. That makes you think a little bit like what happens to people sometimes when they take too much drugs or when they use LSD, and that then for a long time, for many years, their mind is fried. With Kundalini, you see the same, people get fried because of the overheating of their body, and as a result of that they fuzzle out, basically, and their mind is gone. But at the moment when we talk about this magnetic force, you see there are several things happening at the same time or after each other. Because in a particular period, this galvanist theory was changed into the theory of electricity, because they came with new discoveries, and as a result of that, this electricity became something of a flow of electrons going upstream, while the flow of electricity goes downstream. So you can say in that sense that there's two directions in electricity that they saw. So now they developed a theory of electromagnetic force, of thermodynamics, of well, you know, all the scientific stuff. When you look at this framework, you see that from this trance work also came guided trance work, and guided trance work became at a certain point hypnotism. Even the guided trance work by Carl Gustav Jung, which we call psychoanalysis, and the trance work by Freud, also a form of psychoanalysis, all these go back to the same kind of mesmeric theory. You have to understand that the big psychologists from the past, they were all part of occult societies, either in agreement or disagreement, but they are influenced by these kind of things. When that happened, you see that there was an unavoidable change. The next consequential aspect that we need to research at this moment is then the existence of the Theosophic Society. The Theosophic Society was an offshoot from the Catholic Church. They wanted to have a priesthood without priests. The idea is that from Jesus Christ onward, there is a transmission from priest to priest to priest, which shares some of the Jesusness between the priests, and then you as a religious person, you can receive the healing through the weekly ceremony. The idea of the Theosophic Society was originally to do the same, but then without the priesthood, so that it would become more like a common sense. Everybody can give the blessings and give the healings, and this is the real beginning of the modern healing culture that we have. Things like laying up hands, the theories of Christian Science by Mary Baker Eddy in the United States, the modern New Age healing methods and so on, they are all originating from this idea. At the moment when you look at it from that perspective, you can see that in the Theosophic Society, first of all, Madame Blavatsky was a very imposing leader in there, and she based a lot of her teaching on ideas from texts that she said that she found, which are mystical texts from the past. Nobody else has ever found these texts, as far as I understand, but her work is very famous for writing about these texts and commenting on these texts. Her successor was Joseph Leadbeater. Joseph Leadbeater went to India, and besides finding the Krishnamurti person, a child that he allegedly bought from his parents because he thought he was the new Messiah, and that Messiah then basically killed off the Theosophic Society. It's still there, but it's not very powerful anymore. But Leadbeater, when he was in India, he also looked into all kind of Hindu texts and came up with the idea of chakras and auras as differentiated from the muscles, the contracting muscles, the sphincter muscles inside your body, and he made them into sort of energy centers. In the same development, also the idea of auras was developed, and the idea of auras was the seeing of the biomagnetic field, and it was elaborated on. I remember one time studying with this Japanese master who was very famous in Japan, but he died because of over-emphasizing his upper dantian, and he said that he could read all the way till the end of the universe, so his aura was so wide he could know everything. So understanding these things, you see that with the Theosophic Society, there was introduced in the common culture a sort of messianic streak in every person. Every person could become a little bit of a Jesus. And this is the Christian background of the healing culture. Nothing wrong with that, Christianity does its thing, Taoism does its thing, Buddhism does its thing, Hinduism does its thing. I'm not going to judge on these kind of things. Christian healing, also, I don't really mind that much. I started my career as a healer, and I've done a lot of magnetism, I've done exorcisms, I've done trance work, I've done all kinds of different kind of things. So I have the perspective of all these different kind of things. And then by understanding the history of Western esoterics, I also understood more the placement of Chinese medicine in this modern esoterics. Because one of the things that modern esoterics did above everything was that it was ahistorical. It saw basically all the different cultures as sort of based on the same universal truth, just like Catholicism says that its worldview is based on universal truths, and Catholicism just is the best. So every healer can say, I have the best vision of the universal truth. At the moment, when we look at that further development over time, you see that in the 1950s, 60s, when the rock and roll culture came up, the DIY culture also started becoming more popular, and you saw that because of the introduction of sociological studies and the comparison between electricity and magnetism and the way how crowds behave, you saw that students who started using LSD in the 1960s, they started transporting that to their electrified vision of LSD. I don't know if you ever tried. I wouldn't advise it, although as an experience it's very interesting, but you have to be very careful with these things because it can fry your brain. And as a result of that, when you look at that history, you saw that people like Barbara and Brennan and other people from that same generation, they started using the word electricity and energy in their healing. They started talking about auras and chakras as if it was something normal. And I've met Barbara and Brennan. My publisher actually met Barbara and Brennan and introduced me to her. And I agreed with him that Barbara and Brennan was a very spooky person. And she was able to grasp very deep into you. And as a result of that, get things out of you that you didn't want to share. Manipulative, right? And this is also the nature of these things. You saw also the development of things like NLP, also very manipulative in its outlook in some ways. Gradually in the 1980s, more and more people started using the word energy, and the concept of being a healer also became more popular. So you got more and more healers. And Chinese medicine, although it was introduced first in the West at the courts of Karl the Great or Charles the Great, but it became only sort of known in the West by medical doctors and so on who investigated it in the 19th century, and gradually it started gaining some traction. We didn't know much about China, so much of the theories behind it were unknown. And then you saw that in France there was this idea of developing of ear acupuncture, and other theories came about that associated acupuncture more or less with the same theory on magnetism, vitality, and electricity in the body. So the channels all of a sudden became conducts with a circulation which was going around. The problem though, and that is how first impressions very often they get stuck with people. The problem is though that the flow of channels doesn't really exist. In the channel theory as it is being described throughout the past, they talk about the channel flows going up and down in the channel. You have 6 channels, right? And each channel has a branch going towards the arm and to the legs. And at the moment when you look at it from that perspective, that you can see go up and down, it comes basically from the eyes to the eyes, come the eyes, to the eyes, come the eyes. So that up and down movement is basically it. There is no circulation from channel to channel, and the reason for this is because if you get yang into the yin channel will become diseased. If you get the yin in the yang channel will become diseased. So as a result of that, circulation from channel to channel is impossible. There is this yin body fluid, which is inside the channels. And it doesn't really flow that much through all the channels, but it flows through all the channels towards the center of the body, creating the sea of this, the sea or that, and so on and so on. Because it is the part that needs quietude and inner peace. While the way in the body, also coming from the center of the body, going out, has to have wildness. It runs outside of the channels, while the yin runs inside of the channels. What is a fact, though, is that already from, say, the 10th, 11th, 12th century, they started talking about the fact that you could see that at particular parts of the day, and the day was divided into 12 hours, every 12 hours, one of the channels became dominant. So if you say anything, what's flowing through the channels, it's time. So the yin-yang, wu-xing, and so on from the day was gradually recognized as being more dominant during the day because of the rise and fall of yang during the day. Yin, in that sense, is the absence of yang, right? And yin is not an alternative force for the yang, but it's the absence of yang. So the yang rises from the middle of the night, goes to the peak at 12 o'clock, between 11 and 1, and then gradually wanes again and disappears, and gradually climbs up from about 11 to 1 in the night, and then goes up when the yin is at its deepest. That means the absence of yang, because of the reduced influence of the sun, is lowest. Then there is another problem, which is very important, because aura healing, chakra healing, all kind of other things that are being done with magnetism, passes, and so on, they're all valid. Whether they can be proven or whether they can really cure or heal something, I have my doubts sometimes, but it is true that people feel a lot better with it. Healing something and getting better is very different, because in Chinese culture, insofar as there's being spoken of the transmission of something from one person to another person, that means that the person who gives that away has to lose something. So that means that healing somebody, say for instance from being close to death, will lead to you yourself coming closer to death. So it is not something you want to do. This is also why you have to choose your friends carefully. This is also why you have to choose which partner is most suitable for you, because you don't want to vampirize on your partner, and you don't want to be vampirized on yourself by your partner too. This is probably the most important reason why people need healing, because they vampirize on each other. When we talk about energy field healing, we talk about 3 different kinds of qi. We talk about the qi of the universe, and we talk about the qi of the body. But we also talk about fire qi, and fire qi is basically the consciousness guiding ourselves outward. And this is what is used for healing, you can say. But that idea of fire qi is something harmful for you to do, especially when the other 2 qis are not in proper harmony and your body is not fully healthy. That means that you might damage yourself very much if you radiate out qi. So the learning program for that is a very slow program. So this is what we pay attention for this is what we pay attention to in the IOC Daoland program, because it is very important to prepare yourself properly for a particular kind of task. This is why when people start studying with me, I first say, forget about energy. Forget about any of all these kind of things. Try to learn in the way how Chinese medicine originally proposes that. And that means that you first have to get rid of a lot of different kind of ideas and concepts. Later on, you can develop these things, yes, when you have a better understanding. When you talk about the energy field between the palms and the strokes and stuff like this in the healing process, this is something we have to talk about for sure, because in Chinese medicine, what they say, the yang is used for the healing in modern TCM or in energy healing, where they use Qigong healing. But the yang only goes to the outside of the body. So it only goes to the outside of the arm, the outside of the hands, the outside of your legs, backside of your legs, in particular places where the yang channels go, because this is the yang side of the body. The back is the yang side of the body, right? And then the yin is something different, right? It's something different. So it would be the yin, which is the absence of yang, which then is actually moving in between. So the magnetic field and the yin and the yang qi, they are not the same. They are different from each other. They cannot be the same. So what you hold between your palms, magnetic field, is not the same as the yin, and it is not the same as the yang, and it is not the same as qi. Although when you are perfect in your control over it, you could call it a qi. It is a function that is just not described in Chinese medicine or qigong or healing in the past. That is why they performed the ritual. One of the specific things about Western culture is that there's always in communication, in transport from communication from one person to another person, there's a medium required from A to B. That is why, like in Dragon Ball's Z, you see that there's always this rays of energy coming from the hands, and it is like lightning going to other people. Sure, there were gods which were shown to have lightning and punish people with that. That's not healing, of course. Then at the moment when you look at Chinese culture as a whole, so there is no history of healing where a concept like energy is valid. Color healing, yes. Emotional healing, yes. Mental healing, yes. But the problem is that in Chinese culture, they say healing takes place by being around people who are healthy, being around people who resonate wisdom, by being around people who have self-control and are comporting themselves properly, because that resonates with you if you want to be like that. And if you don't want to be like that, then it doesn't resonate with you. So that is a very important part. That makes it very difficult to find a suitable teacher. And in the West, people very often confuse that with spiritual alignment. But this is not a matter of spiritual alignment. This has to do with understanding your options, your possibilities for the future. And at the moment when you recognize in somebody like, wow, this is actually really very valid, you resonate with that person. These are not your ideas yet, but by associating yourself with that person, you might one day. Because transport from one person to another person, according to Taoism, Confucianism, and so on, is a matter of resonance, not a matter of transport. So there's no communication by going somewhere else. This space around us was seen as emptiness, and nothing can transport through emptiness. When we talk about the universe as a whole, and we talk about like the rays that go through it, the rays are not nothingness going through nothingness. No, they are atomic elements, aspects, quants, or whatever you want to call it, and they move through space as a material manifestation of everything. So there's no, space is not empty. And in fact, they found that the sun reaches out with its sunlight to the edge of the solar system, and that there is like a wall of fire there. It's not like a real literal wall of fire, but the temperature is much hotter and much more dense. The material is much more dense, so that it keeps out a lot of radiation from out of space, so that we are protected against these things. We do that because we energized some robots to go fly there, the Voyagers. All right, so I think a last thing has to be added to it. And nowadays dictionaries have been updated in China, but in the relatively recent past, if you would translate the word qi in English, it would say energy in the West. That idea started coming up in the 1980s. In the 1990s, the word energy for qi became commonplace. And nowadays also people consider it commonplace. But if you translated energy back to Chinese, you didn't get qi. You did get calories, calorific values, and so on, for engines, for rockets, for quantum physics, and for astrophysics. So I hope that really helps you to understand energy medicine better with all its validity, and that you understand Chinese medicine better with all its validity too, as two different separate realms. Although they have blended in the West by popular scientism and by popular esoterics, they are by nature different. That doesn't mean that what you do is wrong It's just that it is good to understand where the ideas come from so that you can properly associate with where it comes from. A lot of people, they talk about nationalism and so on and so on. Well, then don't use different cultures for your own science. You are busy with either Chinese medicine or with Western esoteric healing. Chinese medicine has its own esoterics, so don't worry about that. Yes, and it's fascinating, as you can see and read in my Shifu guide. It's complicated. So let's talk about that more if you like. Come to my classes. There are actually quite a lot of people watching my channel. They're following me also on social media, and it would be nice for these people to join my channel, whether it's here on YouTube or on Patreon. It would be even better to become a paying member on my Patreon channel or to follow my classes and support therefore with my work, my research, and also my studies of Chinese medicine as a whole, the history of it, and sharing this with you.